Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me on the screen, as always, is my co-host, Joe Clark. And sorry we didn't get to an episode on draft day last week. It was just a little too hectic for us to squeeze one in, but that means we have a ton to talk about today. Of course, the Steelers entered the draft with 12 picks, left with 10 new rookies, 6 more if you include the undrafted guys that they signed in the days after. So we have a ton to talk about. We're going to, of course, recap the draft class. We're going to talk about a deep dive on Drew Allar in specific, just because of the intrigue of the quarterback position. And then we'll wrap things up talking about an interesting move the Steelers made with Aaron Rodgers, given that he is still holding the team hostage, if you will. I guess that might be strong language, but some would say he's holding the team hostage. I think that's a fair expression at the moment. So we're going to talk about an interesting development in that case. Anyhow, Joe, how's everything in your world since the draft? Have you had any time to decompress? I guess not really.
Not a ton. Yeah, not much at all, but it's been fun diving into these guys and gearing up for rookie mini camp and OTAs and all that. So, excited to, finally at least have the draft behind us, know who is a Steeler instead of talking about who might be. And just ready for the rest of the offseason.
Are you doing anything fun on Saturday is your first kind of day off here since the long marathon of
Yeah,
draft
I
week?
think I think I'm gonna hit the links for the first time
Ah.
this year. I went to a simulator last week and snapped the head clean off the rented driver. So that was quite interesting. So I'm hoping now that I'm back using my clubs that I won't break any of my clubs and but going to a pretty easy course. So hopefully it'll go well and then just gonna probably watch the Kentucky Derby and hang out.
I'm assuming those rented drivers. I mean, what is it? Was that a pricey mistake for you, or
They
did they
they
kind of
you
rent
know
you
what
low grade?
they said it happens all the time and
Oh,
that it was just all good. So it was all right. I was all right. Fine by me. I mean, I could blame them for not having real tees. They kind of had like the little like fake plastic things, and it was an interesting setup. And yeah, I mean, I thought I pured it, and I looked up at the sim, and all I saw was the head of the driver bouncing off against the screen and looking down, and just completely detached. And I was like, oh well. And the draft probably went about 20 yards given that. And I ended up just virtually picking up my ball because I was in a ridge that I could not get out of.
oh, that's funny. All right, well, we're gonna get into the Steelers of it all today, starting with the draft. And I thought a good place to start here before we kind of go pick by pick and maybe zoom in on certain picks to talk a little bit more. We're not going to have time to go in depth on all 10, so we'll kind of pick and choose where we want to stop and talk more. But I thought a good place to start is just draft grades. The experts or analysts, if you will, around the NFL media space were mixed. Some were giving, B minus range. I saw a lot of C plus. Not a whole lot lower than C plus, so I think the consensus is at least the Steelers were a slightly above average. However, of course, we talked about all along the Steelers had a chance to really control this draft class, having 12 picks in all, and so is a C plus really an F because they had every tool they needed to have a really good class. But yeah, there are even a couple of A minuses thrown in there. So Joe, I'll give you the first word. What's your initial just knee jerk draft grade for what those are worth?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth a little bit. I think I'm just gonna stick with a solid B. I think overall I kind of like the talent, but there's a lot of projection involved with some of the guys they've taken. With them taking as many players as they did, how many of them will stick on the 53-man roster becomes a question. But I think for the most part they did a decent job addressing their needs. They got some players that I think late that can play, fill some pretty key roles. So I'll give it a solid B.
I'll give it one notch higher at B plus, and my reasoning. I think the angle before the draft, we talked a lot about okay, the Steelers don't actually have that many needs; they can afford to get best player available types, and, build up the roster just by getting superior talents. Now, I don't know if they really necessarily stuck to that exactly. However, they did kind of stick to that in a way. As you said, a lot of kind of boomer bust picks, if you will, kind of projects with the talent to be really good players. You think of Max Iheanachor, even Jennings Dunker, Dalen Everett, Germie Bernard. I mean, there's just a lot of guys, and actually Bernard doesn't deserve to be in that. He has a pretty high floor. But there's a lot of guys in the class. Robert Spears-Jennings, the late round safety. A lot of guys that, I think have the raw talent to be, pretty good players. At least better than some of the lower ceiling guys that were available in this class. And so the Steelers really swung for the fences with a bunch of these picks. And I think that is an interesting way to go about it when you don't have a bunch of needs. And I'm okay with that because, if you hit on a few of these picks, next thing you know, this is looking like a pretty good class, especially the way they went and attacked the first 2 days of the draft. They got a tackle, they got a quarterback, they got a receiver, they got a corner. So with 4 of their first 5 picks, those are, other than edge rusher, those are like the 4 of the 5 most valuable positions in the sport right now in terms of contract value. I guess you could throw defensive line in the mix there too, but certainly near the top of the list of positional value. And so if even 2 of those first 4 picks hit and become, serviceable to good starters for the Steelers, you look at this draft class and say, wow, that was a pretty good draft class. And I think, the odds are okay that at least a couple of those players hit, if not more. So we'll talk about those a little bit more in specific. And then their 5th pick, they went and they grabbed their biggest need with a left guard, or at least competition for left guard in Jennings Dunker. So I actually think I like the approach overall. Of course, most people's opinion of the class is kind of colored by what happened on day 1. We need to talk about that a little bit. The Steelers ended up selecting offensive tackle Max Iheanachor. He's only played the sport for 5 years. He's got all the talent in the world, the size, the arm length, the foot speed, everything he needs to be a great tackle, but he's newer to the sport. He had plenty of college starts, but he is newer to the sport, and it's kind of evident when you watch some of his tape. But they could have gotten who some thought was the wide receiver 2 on the entire draft board. That is, of course, Makai Lemon. The Eagles traded up for him as the Steelers were already on the phone with Lemon. Joe, it's been talked about a bunch. I don't know if there's a ton new to add, but what is your reaction to that? How did that make you feel in the moment? Maybe how has that developed for you in the days after? And are you okay with the way that they pivoted?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the moment it was a big letdown knowing that Lemon was dropping and he was on the board, and you didn't think Dallas was going to take a receiver, and then you see that Philly straighting up with all the buzz of AJ Brown's basically good as gone, and it was just kind of a sinking feeling knowing that they were probably going to take Lemon. The fact that it came out that the Steelers were on the phone with him, optics wise, like whatever, probably not great, but I really don't think it's a big deal. Like, yeah, he was their guy, fine. I obviously have a board. I don't think Iheanachor was a bad pivot by any means. I think, it honestly might have been a worse look and he's probably a guy that many fans would have preferred them take, but if a worse look if they pass on Lemon, then they go and they take Omar Cooper Jr., they take, Denzel Boston, they take their next receiver on the board. That would have been like the Artie Burns
Yeah.
sort of situation. I think it kind of shows that they had a plan in place that they were then able to quickly pivot to Iheanachor. I mean, I think in the moment, I didn't love the pick because, we've talked about offensive tackle, but I think in the post-draft press conference when Omar Khan admitted that Broderick Jones is, his neck injury is a little bit more of a problem. And I think, in that sense, it makes a lot of sense. And I was somebody who was kind of banging the drum for taking a tackle early. I initially then didn't have one in my final mock because I'm like, they kind of downplayed Broderick Jones's injury and, looked like he was fine. And you had Dylan Cook, but I've grown to kind of like the pick just because you have the upside, and he's a guy that has played a lot in college. So there's all this talk about how him being a project. Well, he is a project, but I mean, he has way more reps than Broderick Jones had in college. He has a little bit of that experience. So it's grown on me, and I did like the way that that's where they pivoted instead of just taking, their next receiver. And I like the way that they kind of played the board in round two to then get Germie Bernard, who's a guy that, I think makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, I think as you said, the optics of it all wasn't great. You want to see a team that has conviction in their draft pick, and you listen to Howie Roseman talk about why they traded up for Makai Lemon, and that just showed like, all right, that GM had conviction. They wanted that player, and they made sure that they could go get him. Now, I give the Steelers, I cut them some slack because there was actually reports that Pittsburgh was trying to trade up to 15. So for all we know, maybe they were trying to go up and get him. Was the report that they were trying to get him, or was it just that they were making a trade to 15?
I think it was just they're making a trade to 15. I don't think there was specifically for Lemon.
I mean, for all we know, it could have, certainly he could have been in the mix there. I would have to go back and look who else was available at the time. I don't know if any other receivers really went from that range. So I guess if it was going to be a receiver, it was going to be Lemon. Perhaps they were trading up for one of the other tackles. Trying to think who else went in that range. Was Monroe Freeling already gone?
Monroe Freeling went in that range. He went to Carolina, I think, at 19, and Blake Miller went to Detroit, I think, the pick before.
Sure. So the Steelers could have been trading up for a tackle. That's probably most likely the two options if they had executed that trade. But the Eagles said they were also working the phones. And, what can you do? Ruben Bain drops. The Buccaneers were like, well, we can't pass on that because we didn't think there was any chance he'd get here. And so, sometimes your trade plans that you work hard on can be foiled by stuff completely out of your control. And so that's what happened in this case. And so, yeah, the optics of it all, especially it being in Pittsburgh. I mean, there's just a barrage of fans on Twitter saying, things about Omar Khan not to be repeated. And I think in the days since, people have cooled on that, though. There is still a pretty solid contingent of the fan base that I think will be talking about that for years to come and comparing the two's careers at every turn. And that'll probably rope in Germie Bernard into the mix too. They're going to compare Bernard to Lemon. They're also going to compare Iheanachor to Lemon. My take is if the Steelers end up with a starting tackle, it's absolutely worth it. I think it's harder to find a starting tackle than a starting receiver. Offensive linemen are just pretty hard to develop these days in the era of not having much practice time and getting a good one, which I think Iheanachor can potentially become. Should be applauded if that's what ends up happening. So I think we are mostly in agreement there. Now, on to round two, they trade up for Germie Bernard, Alabama. Maybe not the most flashy pick in the world, but what was that? Wide receiver 7, 6, 7, something like that off the board. I want to say there were, let me count here. There was Tyson, Tate, Concepcion, Lemon, Denzel Boston go ahead of him, and
Cooper went ahead of him.
And Stribling and Cooper. Okay, so he was, what is that, wide receiver 8, I think we just counted. So he was the 8th off the board. Steelers traded up for him. I think there was kind of a drop-off after Bernard, and so the Steelers felt like they needed to move up. Again, this is a guy that does a little bit of everything, and he does everything pretty well. I would say, not even just average. He's above average in almost every area. He doesn't have the kind of long speed burner, but people made a lot of his like, oh, he doesn't have crazy speed. What was it, a 4.48 or something? It's like, it's not bad. Antonio Brown was like a 4.56 or something for comparison. I'm not comparing the two, but I'm just saying, 40 time is not the end all be all there. So you look at him, and I'd see a super high floor player that can contribute right now. And so, Joe, are you cool with them giving up a 4th rounder to go get him? And I don't know, like, do you think that there's a chance that this is just a better receiver than Lemon in the long run?
I'm certainly okay with them giving up the 4th, given that the receivers are going off the board. If they missed on a receiver again, it would have been ugly for Omar Khan in the Twitter sphere and the analysts talking about how the Steelers missed on getting a receiver. So you have to go up and get your guy, and I think Bernard fits the Steelers really well. Could it be a better situation than Lemon? I mean, yeah, we never really know until these guys hit the field and actually play. So I think there's a chance. I don't think it's necessarily a high chance, but I mean, Bernard does the dirty work. He'll block. He can win over the middle. Um, Play in the slot for the Steelers, and they'll have two good mentors, and in the receiver room, and Michael Pittman and DK Metcalf. He already has a mentor on the team in Troy Fautanu, who he got close with, at Washington. Said he's been a mentor for him since high school, so he's entering, familiar environment, and I think he's a talented player, and I'm glad they went up and got him. I mean, I think Lemon has the higher ceiling, but I'm very happy with Bernard, and I think as your fallback option, it's a very good one.
I think we both ended up with Bernard in our final mocks, and you nailed what, 3 or 4 of those picks. I think I ended up with just 2 of them, but I'm honestly happy. Anytime I can get one in my final mock, I'm like, all right, success, because those mocks are difficult, and this year more than ever, with the Steelers' interest kind of being all over the place. So. Yeah, I kind of thought the wide receivers are going to get pushed down the board a little more. There was buzz of that happening with the offensive tackle and offensive lineman run starting in the first, and that run definitely did start. I think people were projecting 8 or 9 offensive linemen, and what were there, 9 or 10? Because you had Rutledge in the mix there, and so the run did start, but the receiver run, that didn't stop the receiver run from happening. Those 2 positions dominated the first round largely, and so. So you talk about the first 2 picks, Iheanachor, Germie Bernard. Bernard can start pretty much right away, I think, in the slot. I think that he fits what Mike McCarthy talked about in terms of inside-out versatility. Pittman has that. DK Metcalf can kind of have that to an extent. And so you have 3 guys who you can interchangeably move around. That makes it way harder for defenses to figure out what the heck to do in terms of covering those guys. And, maybe this is a year where maybe DK Metcalf has a similar year and the other 2 guys also feast and have, much better years than the wide receiver 2 and 3 in Pittsburgh last year. Or maybe what this ends up doing is freeing up DK Metcalf for a big season, kind of the big season they envisioned when they gave him all that money, top 5 wide receiver at the time in pay. So one more thing real quick on Max Iheanachor, and then we're going to just zoom through the rest of these picks and maybe stop on 1 or 2 more. But where... Do you think he's? I mean, all of his experience came on the right side in college, pretty much. I think he had like 1 start at left tackle, so he's a right tackle by trade in college. He's only 5 years into his football journey in general, and so if you're talking about a guy who can pick up things fast and learn fast, maybe this isn't a bad idea to maybe try this guy at both sides and see if left tackle is possible for him, so that you don't have to move Troy Fautanu. If you had to, week 1, starting offensive line from left to right, Joe, who is that left to right? And then also, if Iheanachor is not in the mix there, where does he figure in?
Yeah, so I think based off trying him at left tackle, I mean, Mike McCarthy said kind of at their voluntary minicamp, they were repping every offensive lineman, on both sides. So I'm sure they'll give him a look and try to rep him on the left side, and if he can hang there, then maybe they stick him there. But I just think it's more likely that Fautanu moves over. So my week 1 starting offense lineman from left to right, I'll go Fautanu at left tackle, um, Brock Hoffman left guard, Frazier, McCormick, and then Dylan Cook. I think Iheanachor will start pretty quickly in. I just don't know if they're going to give him the week 1 start. I think it could be week 3, week 4, and I think Jennings Dunker at guard, kind of the same deal. I mean, Mason McCormick was the sort of the swing guy. Then they had Spencer Anderson too. There was the James Daniels injury, and he kind of got his opportunity. I could see Dunker getting an opportunity pretty early, and I could see Iheanachor getting an opportunity early. I just think week 1, it's tough. It's tough to fully say that's going to be the case week 1. So I'll go with a safe route with the 2 veterans there starting over the 2 rookies, but. I don't think it will be long until you see Iheanachor start and until you see Jennings Dunker start.
Fair. I think I'll go maybe with the youth movement right off the top, depending on what happens with Broderick Jones if he's unable to play week 1. I think if he is healthy, I think there's a good chance Broderick Jones is starting week 1 because he has the experience. He was looking good before the injury in a lot of ways. He was at least looking better. I won't say he was looking good, but he was looking better. And it's in everybody's best interest to get Broderick Jones on the field this year. You want him to be valuable. Whether that means you look into re-signing him, that's probably less likely, or another team re-signs him on a big contract, then you get nice compensatory value. That's what you want. The worst case the absolute worst case for any first-round draft pick is their first contract ends and they don't even get you any compensatory value. That's unacceptable at that point. You got to be at least able to get some comp pick value out of a first-round pick that maybe didn't live up to the potential, in Pittsburgh. So I think they're going to really try to get Jones on the field if he's not ready week one. I think I could see him maybe playing at some point in the season for that reason. I don't think they want him to just kind of be a complete waste. It would be unfortunate to see that. So I'm going to go with I'm actually going to keep things as it was pretty much and just go Iheanachor, Dunker, and then the same three on the right side there. So bring on the youth movement that hopefully is your starting offensive line for years to come. I'm higher on Iheanachor just being able to kind of pick up left tackle just because he seems to be a fast learner. And if there's anything you could tell from his quick ascension from he said he didn't even know how to put on his pads 5 years ago when he started playing at East LA JUCO, the JUCO route that he went. He didn't know how to put on his pads, and now he's a first-round pick. And so that says he's a quick learner, and why can't that be the case flipping side? So, all right, let's zoom through the rest of these. Drew Allar, we're going to talk about more in depth in a second as its own topic. Dalen Everett, cornerback out of Georgia. I don't know if there's a ton that I want to talk about there. I think it's a good, he doesn't need to start right now at all. I think he could develop into a starter, and that's the perfect kind of pick that you wanted. Jennings Dunker, we just kind of talked about him a little bit, so we'll skip that. Of the last, 5 picks, who was the most surprising to you? Who of that group has the most upside to contribute this year?
I mean, I think the most surprising was Gabe Rubio, just because I think he kind of wasn't on any of our radars whatsoever. That pick came in, and it was just kind of like, who's this guy? But the more you look into him, the more it makes sense. Kind of fits the Steelers. Good depth along the defensive line. I think guy who can contribute the most, I'm honestly going to go with Kaden Wetjen, just because I think he's your day one starting kick returner, starting punt returner. And I really do think there's upside with him as a receiver too. I mean, he showed it at the Shrine Bowl. He was constantly open. He had good hands, good route running. I don't think he's going to be, enter the league as an immediate, threat as a receiver, but I think he can be, an underneath guy, somebody that can come in and, screens, just work after the catch. If Aaron Rodgers comes back, I think he's a player that his ability to work after the catch is going to fit in really well with this offense. But just for his return ability, I think Wetjen will make a pretty big impact right off rip.
Yeah, you guys spoke highly of Wetjen at the Shrine, so I'm interested to see what he can do. He's a pretty small guy, isn't he?
Yeah, he's very small.
Very.
I think he's like 5'7".
Oh man. Yeah, so it's tough to get a guy like that on the field on offense, but I'm open to it. They certainly could use somebody who's going to cook people right off the line and get open in a hurry. They don't really have that guy, even with Bernard. That's not his game. He runs nice crisp routes and stuff, but he's not quite as shifty and explosive as a guy like Wetjen. So I'm open to that for sure. But you look at the Iowa receiving corps last year, and their number one receiver was a tight end. Wetjen was number 3, the second receiver with 20 receptions. You just ask, why the heck weren't they using these guys more? If Wetjen really is a NFL capable receiver, where was the disconnect there? And maybe they just weren't using him the right way or whatever. But certainly you get to the Shrine or the East West Shrine, and he's by all accounts just was unstoppable at times, and so it's at least intriguing. I think my biggest year one impact I'm going to make is actually Nowakowski. I think the Steelers are kind of lacking that fullback type on the roster. This is a guy who, can play a variety of roles. I think you look at McCarthy's history with these types of players. He had Lupke in Dallas, and then he had, who was it in Green Bay? Kuhn.
John Kuhn, yeah.
And so these are guys that, they're not like crazy statistic guys, but they're guys who definitely made an impact. And if you look at how Nowakowski was used in Indiana, they looked at him a lot in key situations, third downs, must-have-it situations. Fernando Mendoza was looking Nowakowski's way a lot, and that's telling when you look at a championship caliber team. They obviously won the national championship, and Nowakowski, some say they would not have won that national championship if they didn't have Nowakowski. I'm sure you could say the same thing about a lot of guys. It's not just, I'm not trying to say that they won it only because of him, but they wouldn't have won it without some of the contributions he made throughout the season. So I think that low key, that might end up being the Steelers' best of the final five. Gabe Rubio, that one was surprising just because none of us knew his name. Robert Spears-Jennings, we already talked about, blazing fast 40, and probably if he declared last year for the draft, maybe a top 100 pick, according to some people. I think his production kind of dropped off. He had 4 forced fumbles in 2024, I want to say, and that dropped off a little bit. So the production wasn't quite what you wanted in 2025, but he has the speed. He could be a special teams guy in the meantime, and, you really need speed on the back end and youth. So you add some youth, you add some speed. Who knows what happens there, but I like the upside there. Heidenreich, our Josh Carney's been all over that, and you as well from the Shrine Bowl. You guys got a chance to, Josh spoke to him at the Shrine Bowl, and this is a guy that, did you end up having him in your final mock? I know Josh.
I did not.
Okay. Well, this is a guy that if you've been following Steelers Depot draft coverage that we've had, mention of a few times, and, the obvious connection as a Pittsburgh local, him walking the stage was awesome. It was one of the coolest draft moments that I can remember, in his navy blues and, doing the salute and just getting a huge applause from the record-breaking crowd there in Pittsburgh. It was an awesome moment, but it isn't just a feel-good story. This is a guy who can kind of play a variety of roles for the Steelers. And, Mike McCarthy talked about opening up the playbook. And what does that mean? You look at his past. Our Josh Carney wrote about, Ty Montgomery and how they used him in the past in Green Bay under Mike McCarthy. Could they use him in that kind of similar role? The Steelers also, especially with Aaron Rodgers, they leaned on Kenneth Gainwell quite a bit as a receiver out of the backfield. Warren can do that. Dowdle can do that kind of. But if you can get a guy like Heidenreich involved to fill that receiving role out of the backfield, that's an interesting proposition to me. I think he can also be a special teams guy. All right, that kind of sums up I want to just fly through those. We'll skip the rest of this. Let's get to the Drew Allar talk. Jerry Dulac initially reported, leading up to the draft, that they would only take a quarterback starting in the 3rd round, and only if they liked the upside more than that of Will Howard. And of course, they ended up taking Drew Allar with their first 3rd round pick, number 76 overall. And so that would maybe suggest, if Dulac's reporting is accurate, that's a big if, but if it's accurate, then they like his upside more than Howard. And what does that mean for Will Howard? What does that mean for the QB room? Joe, your initial reaction to number 76, using that high of a pick on Allar. I know we were both kind of hoping that if they drafted a quarterback, it would be Allar, but your initial reaction?
Yeah, I was a little surprised that they took him when they did in the 3rd round. I had my mock at him go 99. I thought they could have maybe waited to get him, but after Carson Beck went early, they really like him. Get your guy. I don't really have a big problem with it, especially given how the rest of the 3rd round went. Yeah, initially I was like, oh, maybe it's a little early for him, but yeah, if they're going to take a quarterback, this was who I wanted. I think even the most cynical of draft analysts will admit that his ceiling is that of an NFL starter, if he figures it out. But there's a lot of work to be done. But that's why the Steelers hired Mike McCarthy, is to develop a quarterback. And I'm always game to have as many young quarterbacks to try to develop into a starter, especially when you haven't had, a good starting quarterback, good in Pittsburgh since Ben Roethlisberger retired. So I'm game for them taking him and seeing if Mike McCarthy and Tom Arth can figure it out and see if they can make him into a starter, even though I think, it might be an uphill battle, but I think his chances are much better than, Carson Beck, obviously. I'm so glad they didn't take Carson Beck. Or, even a Garrett Nussmeier, he fell because of injury concerns, or Cole Payton. So I was okay with it. I know there's a lot of people that really don't like the pick, a lot of Penn State people. He doesn't show up in big games, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. But of the quarterbacks they were going to take, and I think I was pretty resigned to them taking a quarterback. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, though. He was the one I wanted.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think you look at some of the comments that Tom Arth made and Mike McCarthy's made since the pick, and I mean, you even look at what scouts were saying about him. I had that Bob McGinn article go up the other day from the anonymous scouts and what they were saying about Allar prior to the pick. I mean, it basically all boiled down to the same stuff that everybody's saying. He has all the physical tools. Tom Arth more or less hinted they think he has the best arm in the class. Jeremy Fowler reported that they kind of see his arm as having like young Joe Flacco potential, and I'm sure Steelers fans will remember that era. That we kind of always joked about the heave and pray offense and the pass interference penalties way of moving down the field, and it was frustrating. But that was made possible because Joe Flacco was really able to push that thing down the field. Allar, having that kind of potential is the Steelers viewing him as having that kind of potential is a good sign. The footwork of it all is the big question, and whether he can kind of transition into a better suited offense for him. I thought it was interesting. Penn State's coach Terry Smith went on 93.7 The Fan and was talking about, well, our system didn't really even give this guy a chance because it wasn't built for him, and that was unfair for him, I think was the exact term he used. They made him run a lot, and he's not a running quarterback. He's a pro-style quarterback. I think he can run in a pinch, but he's more of a pocket mobile type of mobility, not a tuck and run type of mobility. And so if they kind of trained him to be a running quarterback when that isn't what he is, that's maybe some of how that bad footwork came into play. It sounds like, at least according to Jeremy Fowler, they feel Mike McCarthy feels pretty good, has a good sense, I think is the word he used in his Buzz article this morning on ESPN. He has a good sense of how to fix Drew Allar's footwork issues. And if they can marry his legs and feet with his arm and his eyes, then you're talking about a guy who really could be a starter and could be a home run steal for the Steelers. Obviously, there's a lot of work between now and then to get there, but I think it's worth the number 76 pick just for the fact that, the Steelers basically need to take a chance on the quarterback position every year until they find one. People are going to say, and even what Ben Roethlisberger was saying, they shouldn't draft a quarterback for a couple years, build up the team, and then when you do draft a quarterback, they'll be ready. I mean, you look at this roster right now, and it's pretty darn ready. There's a reason we were just talking about they didn't have many needs to draft for and all that. I mean, I think the roster's in a much better spot than people give it credit for. You look at that depth chart, and they even have pretty good depth at almost every position at this point. And so I think it's ready to start taking swings at a quarterback, and that's exactly what this is. So what does this mean for Will Howard is the big question. Steelers pumped him up basically all offseason for the last 4 months, been talking about, he's the backup plan, and all the reports where the Steelers, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't sign, Will Howard is who they're going to roll with, and all this stuff. Was that just smoke, or what's going to happen with Will Howard moving forward?
I really don't think it means much for him this year. I think maybe his leash is getting shorter, but I just don't think there's any way the Steelers can view Will Howard, or I'm sorry, not Will Howard, Drew Allar as being ready to start NFL games this year. I mean, Mike McCarthy knows the footwork's an issue, and he had brought it up to him. You mentioned that he changed his footwork between his combine and his pro day. He said it's something he thinks he can fix. Um, but Drew Allar playing out of structure has been an issue. His footwork, and as a result of all that, kind of his accuracy. I don't think he's ready to start games in the NFL this year. So if Aaron Rodgers doesn't come back, if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, I still think you have Will Howard next in line. I mean, after they took Drew Allar, I think it kind of came up pretty quickly in Rappaport, so they're open to moving Mason Rudolph. You get a late round pick in return. I think that makes more sense. Yeah, it's a little risky to roll with two young quarterbacks as a backup, but I mean, I don't think anybody is confusing the Steelers team as a legitimate Super Bowl contender where you need, a proven backup quarterback to come in case of injury or whatever. I think having a young guy behind Aaron Rodgers is not the worst thing in the world, and you have Will Howard entering year two. So I don't think it really means much for this year. Now you give Drew Aller this year of development, another offseason of development. Does that mean, Will Howard's no longer the flavor of the month of the guy they hype up to potentially be their starting quarterback? Maybe. If he doesn't get a chance this year, I think you can make a real argument that his time's running out to prove his worth as a starter. But As far as this season goes, I still think he's probably their backup plan for Aaron Rodgers. I still think he'll start the year as QB2. I think it's more Mason Rudolph has to be worried for his job. I mean, Mike McCarthy did say he'd like to keep four quarterbacks, whether that's three on the active roster, one on the practice squad. Maybe. I mean, I think you let go of Howard, you let go of Mason Rudolph, there'll be some level of demand for them. Don't really think you can sneak them through and get them onto the practice squad. But I think for Howard right now, it doesn't really mean much. I think give it a year or two, and his leash is shorter for his chance to actually start a game for the Steelers if that doesn't happen this year.
Yeah, if you can get, I mean, the practice squad rules were relaxed a few years back, where veterans can get on there. So can you get Mason Rudolph on the practice squad? I wouldn't say that's impossible, to be honest. And if not, Cooper Rush is somebody who's available out there. That's somebody Mike McCarthy had success with in the past, another guy with starting experience. So, could Cooper Rush be that practice squad stash quarterback? I think that's also a possibility as well. So, yeah, I don't know exactly what it does mean for Howard. Mike McCarthy pretty much right away said, "Oh no, there's no reason to we're gonna have plenty of ways to develop this whole quarterback room." He's been talking about developing the room instead of developing players, which is an interesting approach. But right away he did say the only challenge we're gonna have is a CBA, which is that is the big challenge, Mike McCarthy. That is the challenge. Thank you for stating that. We knew that, and that is you can't just downplay that. That is an issue. This practice time is shorter than ever. You don't get that much practice once the season starts, especially, and so all you get is camp and the preseason. If one of these guys misses any time during camp or the preseason, you're super behind the eight ball in the evaluation process. We saw that last year with Will Howard, obviously. And yeah, I mean, how are you going to find enough practice time? I think the answer right now is just keep Aaron Rodgers out of the equation as long as possible, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I think you give every rep possible. Sorry, Mason Rudolph, you give every rep possible to Will Howard first, Drew Allar second. See where it goes from there. Maybe the pecking order changes if Drew Allar really blows everybody away. Hopefully, I guess at this point, I don't know. Ben Roethlisberger sure seemed to be team Will Howard for what it's worth, which was kind of funny to me. He kind of is giving Drew Allar the Mason Rudolph treatment in terms of, why'd you take this third-round quarterback? Which is ridiculous to me, because back then you had Ben Roethlisberger in his prime. I understand not wanting to take Rudolph at that point, but now it's like, why would you not take quarterbacks, Ben? What are you talking about? So, let's see. There was one more thing I wanted to ask here from the 2027 draft. Is this are the Steelers major players still in the 2027 draft market with this development drafting Drew Allar?
I think it's hard to say right now because you got to see if they like how Aller develops, if they like how Will Howard develops. I mean, I think right now I think it's safe to say that they would be just based off not knowing that if they think they can get a surefire guy. But again, where are they going to pick next year? Are they going to be able to get a surefire guy? Are they going to trade up for one if they still think they could get something out of Aller and or Howard? So, um, I would think that it's a higher likelihood. Maybe they address a different position than quarterback instead of, I think we had quarterback number one all along for 2027, but I think maybe now it's maybe number two or number three on their list of potential first round picks. But I think it just really depends on how this season of development goes for those two young quarterbacks before you can definitively say that they're in or out of the race.
Sure, that makes sense. And certainly there'd be a lot of upset fans if the Steelers did the thing once again where they draft the quarterback in the weak quarterback class and then they pass on the quarterback in the strong quarterback class. So extra pressure on Allar or Howard, one of the two, to work out if that ends up being the case. All right, we're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers now, everybody's least favorite subject, but we must talk about it because there was a notable update. Kind of much ado about nothing, so we're going to talk about it from the top. But the Steelers placed the rare unrestricted free agent tender on Aaron Rodgers, and what does that mean? Well, the hapless NFLPA union has somehow allowed a structure where a player that is supposedly unrestricted, which means they are free to sign with anybody, can be tendered. And what does that mean? That means that the Steelers basically place some kind of contractual thing on Rodgers where if it reaches July 22nd, then Steelers will have exclusive rights to negotiate with him. In the meantime, this does give the Steelers, basically extends the Steelers' window to be able to get compensatory return for Aaron Rodgers if he goes and signs elsewhere between now and July 22nd. And so, all that to say, the comp pick window otherwise is now over. It ends shortly after the draft. And so if, say in a world where Patrick Queen is a free agent and he went and signed somewhere after the draft, the Steelers would not get anything in compensatory return because that's past the compensatory window. We saw this a couple, 6, 7, 8, however many years ago with, I think it was Alejandro Villanueva with the Ravens. They waited until just after the draft because they didn't want to mess up their comp pick formula. They didn't want to help the Steelers' comp pick formula. And so they kind of did a handshake deal and ended up signing him after the draft once the window was over. And so this is the Steelers protecting themselves against Rodgers if he decides to sign elsewhere. Joe, does this mean that Aaron Rodgers is going to sign elsewhere?
No, I really don't think so. I mean, if you look at what's open right now, it's the Cardinals, and I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to spend his last year in Arizona unless he wants to do peyote in the desert. And then maybe the Broncos, if you really think the Bo Nix injury is a concern. I know Mike Florio floated that one, and basically everyone in Denver had a grand old laugh over that and said it was completely and blatantly false, and that he probably got by an April Fool's joke. So I don't really think it means much of anything. I think it's just the Steelers covering their rear end just in case something happens, that they can protect the comp pick value. And then if Rodgers drags things into July and then they say, hey, you have to sign with us, and if you really want to play elsewhere, then we'll trade you and get something of value. So it's really just the Steelers preserving they can get value if he goes elsewhere. And I don't think either side has really any intention of that happening, but it's smart because if he does, then they're safe. And you can say, hey, we didn't get got by Aaron Rodgers. So I think it's kind of a nothing burger. It's just a smart move by the Steelers, but I don't think it means much of anything.
Yeah, if there's one worse piece of optics than letting this thing drag out until June once again, as it did last year, the worst piece of optics would be if you waited once again and then he went and signed with another team. Man, that would make everything look so bad in Pittsburgh. And so this just protects, okay, we at least have some protection in case something does happen. So well said there. Really much ado about nothing. One important note, the initial reports say that the Steelers have the right to match offers. They do not. This is not that kind of a tender, and so if he does sign elsewhere, all it means is the Steelers get comp value. Apparently, Rodgers knew about this. His agent knew about this, and so anyone who's trying to stir up drama on, this is going to piss off Aaron Rodgers because now he feels boxed in, I don't think that's the case. I think it was just like, hey, bud, we're putting this on you just in case. It's just better to need it and not have it than. Or sorry, whatever the saying is, the Steelers, basically took that approach. And so, all right, I think that's everything on Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully we aren't talking about him again until he makes his decision, which is expected to be around OTAs. At least that is the latest movement of the goalposts, if you will, on his situation. We're going to go into our listener question. If you guys want a question answered, and we would love some additional questions to choose from, there should be plenty after the draft, I would think. 412-254-3145. That is also in the show notes if I talk too fast. You can call and leave a voicemail, or you can text if you don't want your voice on the show. That's totally fine. We can read it off. Just tell us your name, where you're from, and a brief question, and we will answer it on a future episode. This one from our good friend, Brett in San Angelo.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett from San Angelo. And, just looking at the you was asked about the adjective to describe the draft. And to me, it was uneven. You have some picks that were kind of future development, your first round pick, developmental corner, developmental quarterback. And then you had some win now picks with, Bernard and Turner and fullback. And, some people you knew right off, some people you never heard on, et cetera. It's kind of uneven. My question for y'all is the Allar pick. Now, we have this kind of cloud about Rodgers hangover. They had, is he coming, is he not? We all think he is coming back. But if Rodgers does not come back, does that make you feel any different a bit about the Allar pick? I'll shut up and listen to the answer.
All right. Thank you, Brett, as always, for the question. If Rodgers does not come back, topical to what we were just talking about, does that make us feel different about this Allar pick? Joe?
Not really for me. As we talked about, he was kind of the guy I wanted to take anyway if they're going to take a quarterback. I still don't think he's ready to start immediately. And I think if Rodgers doesn't come back, he's your QB3 and you have Howard and Rudolph, which is going to be their plan B all along. And it just gives you another young quarterback to develop. So to me, I don't think Rodgers coming back or not coming back has any real, it doesn't really sway my opinion on Allar that much.
Yeah, I don't know if it sways my opinion. I will just note one thing. Jerry Dulac said if Mike McCarthy had one impact on this draft class, he said really it felt kind of status quo from old how everything used to work under Mike Tomlin's regime. But he said if McCarthy did have one impact on the draft class, it's that the Drew Allar pick at number 76, that he called, quote, Mike McCarthy's guy. And so, you know, Mike McCarthy went out of his way to say he doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of when he comes to a team, he's not going to just be like, oh, none of these guys are my guys, and so I got to get rid of them. And so, you know, he's obviously been talking up Will Howard. He obviously likes Will Howard. I do believe everything he said is true and wasn't just some weird smokescreen. But if Allar is his guy, you know, he can like Howard and that not be his guy, and Allar is his guy, then that does mean something, and it's worth keeping in your mind as this thing progresses. Also, a top 100 pick versus a 6th round pick, like it or not, where your pick does matter in a lot of cases. I mean, it matters in terms of the money that they're being paid, first of all, but just in terms of how invested the team feels in that player and you know, giving them a fair shake to potentially start. I think all of that at least is worth mentioning. So thank you for the question, Brett. Again, 412-254-3145. Call or text that number with a question. We'll answer it on a future episode. That's everything. It was a little bit longer of an episode, a lot to talk about, and we'll certainly be talking more about the draft picks moving forward. We kind of skipped over a few of them, so maybe we'll circle back to a couple of those draft picks that we didn't spend time on in next episode. I'm Ross. That is Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.